Hey guys, Luke here. What I want to do today is take you through everything you need to know about protein. So there's a lot of myths in the fitness industry about protein. There's also a little bit of dogma about it. I want to try and break all this stuff down so you know exactly what you need to do with protein to make sure that you can move towards your goals. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to go through a very quick rundown of digestion of protein and absorption process. Okay, that's going to be very quick, but just so you have a bit of a very basic understanding. And then we're going to go into some function and the structure of protein and how that looks in everyday food. And then lastly, we'll talk about how much protein do you need and the timing of protein throughout your day. So, like I said, by the end of this, I want you to be able to have a really clear, concise picture of how much protein you need, how it all works, and be able to individualize it for you and your goals. So first of all, with protein, what happens is basically is two parts. We have a breaking down part of the process, and then we have an absorption part of the process. So the breaking down part of the process happens when we first look at that food. If we look at that burger, we're already secreting juices to start breaking that food down. So just by looking, just by smelling, just by seeing that, already the process begins. That process continues as the food enters into our stomach through different enzymes. Hydrochloric acid, HCl, is one of the really big important ones. Now, this breaking down process is really, really important because if we don't have that breaking down process right, everything south of that can lead to systematic problems. And what I'm talking about here is things like leaky gut, irritable bowel syndrome symptoms, and things like that. So that first part of the process of breaking down is really important. So we start breaking it down by looking at it, by smelling it, by all those senses, and then we keep breaking it down as it comes into the stomach. From there, the protein is now broken up into smaller cells, basically. Okay, it starts off with bonds of 5, and then by the time it comes through the stomach and starts entering into our small intestine, which is the next part of the process, it's down to 2 and 3 chains holding that protein together. So it's been broken down. From there, the small intestine actually uses about 50% of the total amount of protein that you've just eaten for its own use. So it'll use it for making hormones, is a really big one, and for its own protein synthesis. From there, we have further breakdown from the small intestine. Some of it will go into the liver. That liver will do things like making amino acids that we actually need to produce ourselves. Okay, I'll go a little bit more into that later on. And then the rest of it, which is around about 25% of the total protein that you ingested, is the protein, mainly in what's called branched chain amino acids, floating through our bloodstream. Okay, and this is then uptaken by things like skeletal muscle. Okay, that's the use that most of us know that protein is for. So basically, we start breaking down that protein before we even start eating it. We keep breaking it down into the stomach. We keep breaking it down a little bit further in the small intestine. And then from there, even more into the liver. And then we start absorbing it into our bloodstream, mainly in this really small singular cells called amino acids. Okay, so that's a very, very short run through of digestion and absorption of what happens with our protein. From there, okay, now I'm going to talk about the function of protein. So what is protein for? So protein is, okay, like I said in those above processes, to make our own amino acids, which is called non-essential amino acids. I'll explain the difference between non-essential and essential shortly. It's also for our intestine, okay, and for our gut bacteria. And then it also serves a function to build and protect muscle. So this is I guess, the use that we all know about. So I'm going to really concentrate more on that because that's the thing that's most relevant here in terms of strength training, in terms of changing your body. So in terms of protecting our body, yes, it does play a very big role in making sure that we don't lose muscle, and it also aids in building muscle. I'm going to talk about that in a second through something that's called protein breakdown versus protein synthesis. Okay, so this is going to tie into timing of your protein as I explain this. So basically, here we are. When you strength train, you actually break down muscle tissue acutely. So straight after you've trained, you actually go into a state of what's called protein breakdown. That protein breakdown, so let's say we train at this point here. Protein breakdown means that we come down here. So at this point, we're actually losing muscle. Obviously, we don't want to be losing muscle. We want to be up here. So this is breakdown. So you can think of breakdown as losing muscle, and then you can think of up here protein synthesis. You can think of this area as putting on muscle. Okay, so we do a session, you just do a big bench press session, we go into protein breakdown. From there, if we eat some protein, okay, amino acids, then we're gonna come back up to maintenance here, where we have a net maintenance level of protein. If we eat enough, then we might come up here. So at this point here, we're above the line, we're putting on muscle. If we have a decent amount of protein in each meal, okay, it gets a little bit more complex, but we're looking at normally at around about 30 to 40 grams of protein at your meal. That is total protein, not 40 grams of chicken breast. Then we normally stay in protein synthesis there for about 4 to 5 hours. Okay, so all of a sudden we've got 4 to 5 hours here of putting on muscle. We're going to dip back down. If we don't eat for 8 hours after that meal, so we eat here and then we don't eat for 8 hours, then we're going to dip back down here for 3 to 4 hours where we're losing muscle again. If we eat after 4 to 5 hours, that peak of protein synthesis is going to come back up again. So we're putting on muscle again. So the goal is to always be staying in what's called a net positive protein balance. Always above the line, or at least at maintenance, so we're not losing muscle. So the key for this is actually having some protein regularly throughout the day. How much protein do we need? What sort of protein should you be having? Okay, these are big important questions. So most of the research shows that we want 1.8 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilogram that you weigh when we're strength training. So 1.8 to 2.2 grams per kilogram that you weigh. So let's say you weigh 100 kilos, to make it very simple. You're going to need something between 180 to 220 grams of protein throughout the day. Now there's a couple of different considerations. If you're carrying extra fat, then you're going to go towards the lower end. If you're super lean and carrying a lot of muscle, you're going to be going towards the higher end. Okay, so let's say we need 220 grams of protein throughout the day, and you know you want to eat 4 times per day, then all you're going to do to make sure that we stay in a net positive balance there, where we're not going into protein breakdown, but where we're either at maintenance or we're having periods all throughout the 24 hours of putting on muscle, then what we need to do, we need to divide your 4 meals up by your 220 grams of protein. So if we did 220 divided by 4, in my head that is 55 grams of protein at each meal. Okay? And then you would be looking at spreading your meals throughout the day. So let's say you're awake for 16 hours of the day and you're having 4 meals, then you would have a meal roughly every 4 hours, and that would really protect you from going into that muscle breakdown, that protein breakdown, and you would stay above the line. So this is important whether you're trying to lose fat or whether you're trying to put on muscle. Okay, because if you're trying to lose fat, if we don't have enough protein and if we're always in this breakdown here, you're also going to be losing muscle, which no one wants. Okay, in terms of strength, in terms of your body composition and how you look and how you feel, it's not going to aid you at all to be losing muscle. So that gives you a little bit of a rundown of how much protein and how often. So this notion that we need to be eating straight after training, okay, within a half an hour magic window, is not really 100% correct. The most important thing is what happens across the whole 24 hours. So let's say you haven't eaten for 3 hours before your strength training and you're not planning to eat until 3 hours after your strength training. That would be 6 hours, and that means you would be going into a deficit. So we want to still try and think about shorter windows, 4 to 5 hours. Now, I'm going to wrap this up pretty shortly. I just want to go through, so actually one thing that is important to note, that if you don't have enough protein, okay, your body still needs to repair that muscle tissue. So if you're just did that big bench press session, okay, and your body wants to come back stronger for it and wants to lay down some muscle tissue on the pecs, on the triceps, so next time it can overcome that session a lot easier, it doesn't care if there's no protein in your system, no amino acids floating throughout the bloodstream. But it will take protein from another part of your body that it doesn't feel like is so important. So let's say you haven't trained your legs in 3 weeks. It might take some protein out of your quadricep muscle and put it on the chest muscle that you used in bench press. So it's very important that we do get that regular flow of amino acids throughout the bloodstream so that we're not taking protein from other parts of your body. Hopefully that makes sense. In terms of what protein you should be having, well, whey protein is, in terms of powders, I'll stay on powders just for now. Whey protein is the highest quality in terms of how much it can be used. Okay, but if you can't digest whey very well, then there's no point in having whey protein. Your next best bet is something like a combination plant-based powder, like a rice and a pea protein together. Pea protein by itself is very poor, and hemp protein is actually also very poor in terms of the protein content and in terms of how much we're able to actually use. And then in terms of daily sources, okay, the highest quality things that we can make the most of, which are called complete protein sources, because they have essential amino acids in them and the non-essential amino acids in them, which I'll touch base on in a second. These are things like meat, dairy, poultry, fish. Okay, there's non-meat sources. You're looking at more things like different grains, quinoa, and then different vegetables like broccoli and whatnot. You're going to be getting a lot less total protein in those incomplete sources though. So what I mean by essential amino acid versus non-essential, means that we're actually making it in our body all the time anyway. So this is one of the parts of the digestion and absorption process of protein in the liver. Okay, we make these non-essential amino acids through a process called transamination. Essential amino acids are things that we do not get in, or that we do not make, all of the time, okay, or actually at all. So these are things that we need to add into our diet to make sure that we are getting complete protein profile of the 22 amino acids. So each 22 amino acids make up protein, and each of them plays a different role. They all have different qualities. And so it's really important that we try and get the full array. And those things that I mentioned, the meat, the dairy, the poultry, they're your best bet in terms of getting the full array. So hopefully that makes sense. So we ran through digestion and absorption, how that occurs very quickly. We had a bit of a look at function. Function being to protect against muscle breakdown here, and to help muscle protein synthesis, so where we're building muscle here. And then structure was more looking at the amino acids, the 22 amino acids, essential versus non-essential. And then the timing, we talked about the timing, making sure that we eat every 4 to 5 hours, ideally, getting that protein hit. And totals, we talked about 1.8 to 2.2 grams per kilogram that you weigh. So hopefully